Welcome to the Jesus Magnet podcast. I'm your host, Joel Hillary, and we have an awesome episode with Robert Cope. How you doing, Rob?
I'm very well, thanks, Joel.
Thank you for coming on to the podcast and sharing your story. You're such a dear friend to us, family friend. We go back...
It's a long time now, eh?
Well, it might be almost most of my life.
Most of us, 1996, I think we moved to Queenstown.
Okay, I was born in 94, so...
There you go.
Yeah.
Just a wee tacker.
Yeah, so Rob's a pastor in the the Salvation Army, and used to live in the same town as us, and then moved away to... Where'd you go after Queenstown?
After Queenstown, we went to Porirua.
Porirua?
Yeah.
And he's got an incredible family. Shout out to... So we've got Hadassah, Andrew, Chris, and Phil.
That's right. And the wonderful Julie, of course.
And Julie, yes. Shout out to all of the Copes, and hope you're all doing incredible. Let me just pass it over to you, Rob. Why don't you just share, just so that everybody's got a bit of context, who you are, where you're from, what you do. Sure. Even though I sort of did that in a nutshell.
Yeah.
But
so thanks, Joel. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really want to honour what you're doing. I think it's great. I enjoy listening to your podcast. I'm 61 years old. I'm 62 later on this month, and I was born at a very early age, way down Dunedin, and moved around a little bit as a kid with my family. Went to a little town in northern Southland called Mossburn.
Oh, yeah?
And I lived there for 7 years. That was cool. Then we went to Invercargill. It was there that God really took me on an interesting journey. My family were never church people.
Oh, so you didn't grow up as a Christian with your family and all that?
No.
Oh, wow.
No, but when I was born in Dunedin, we lived out the Otago Peninsula, a little town called Broad Bay, and we lived with my grandmother, my mum and dad and I, and my grandmother was one of those, she was German by descent, really, she was a little bit weird and just loved God with all her heart and never went to church.
It is a weird thing to most people. When you run into someone who loves God with all their heart, it's such a strange thing to encounter if you don't know what they're doing. Yeah. It's a weird thing.
Yeah. And one of the great legacies I have from my grandmother is that there's never been a moment in my life where I haven't believed in the existence of God.
Wow.
Never. I've never had a doubt about that.
Yeah.
I've doubted a whole lot of stuff, but I've never doubted the existence of God. But there's a big difference in believing in God than believing God. And that's, I guess, the bigger part of my journey. So I grew up, when we moved to Mossburn, when I was 7, I think. New family, small town, very small town. And my parents wanted to get me involved in something that would be suited. And I joined a local boys' brigade unit led by a gentleman by the name of Donald Fraser.
Oh, yeah?
He's gone to be with Jesus now, but he, apart from my grandmother and my family, probably that man set a course for my life that he may have been unaware of at the time. Just a very godly man who cared about... cared that young boys and young people would find Christ and find purpose in life. And he did that through the local boys' brigade unit, so I joined that and got involved in some church activities out of that, but Donald's life really spoke to me in a deep way, and I didn't realise how much till years later. And then our family moved to Invercargill. I started a new high school down there and got introduced to a guy at school who was responsible for showing me around. He introduced me to a friend of his who invited me to attend a group at school called Interschool Christian Fellowship, and one of the teachers at the school led that. Yeah, and it was just a weekly meeting with interested people who wanted to find out more about God and what he was like and that sort of thing. And so I started going along to that. The teacher who led it was a Salvationist lady from Invercargill, and she invited us to join the youth group there. We did that, and I went to, I think, the first youth conference that they held after I joined down there, and I was sitting in that meeting one day, not having a great experience of church, always having believed in God but not knowing Him. I'd lived, I was the poster child for goody two shoes kids. I'd never been spanked by my parents, never needed to be, that they knew about. And I was always good, always believed in God, but didn't know Him. And sitting in that service that day, all of a sudden, I can't remember who was speaking, I can't remember what they were speaking about, but I was just completely overwhelmed with the presence of Jesus and His Spirit, and I can still remember it as if it was this morning.
Wow.
It was just overwhelming, and whilst I was a really good kid, I only never had any punishment at school apart from one detention for something I didn't do. But I was overwhelmed with this sense of love and justice at the same time. I knew that my life didn't measure up to what God had for me. And it wasn't in a condemning sense. It was an incredible sense of overwhelming and unconditional love. And it's as if God was saying, there is so much more. There is so much more. And I just opened myself up to God, and He filled me with His Spirit that day, and oh my goodness, it just started a lifelong journey of that continues to this day.
So how old were you, Rob, at this time?
I was 15 at that time.
15.
Yeah.
I think I had a similar experience when I was 14 or 15 as well.
Yeah.
It's incredible. That age, I think, is a real catalyst for a lot of Christians.
It is.
It's that age where they're old enough to start to really think for themselves and not lean entirely on their parents.
That's right.
If they grow up in a Christian home. But also ones that grow up outside of a Christian home, they start to question things even if their parents aren't Christians or don't believe in God or whatever they believe in. They just start to think original thoughts around that age.
And questions are so important. And the moment we get afraid of questions, and I might read a quote a wee bit later on that, but questions are just so important that we ask them and that we have opportunity to ask them in a safe environment. It's very, very cool.
Absolutely. That's what this podcast is definitely for, because, you're a minister yourself, so there's sort of, not that there's regulations on what you can and can't preach on, but they seem to be more or less topical discussions on God's love or God's faith or justice and different things like that, or the fruits of the Spirit and things like that. But this podcast really is to get into the nitty-gritty on some things if we want to share on, I don't know, the injustice that we might find in the Bible. That's not really preached on in church too much. It's always the justice and things like that. So, I'll pass it back to you.
In fact, I'll read a quote now if that's okay. It's because it was transformational for me.
Absolutely.
I was sharing with you a story earlier, and I might share that now. I've been in Christian ministry now with Julie for over 30 years. 23 of that pastoring Salvation Army churches, and 6 of that helping with youth work and children's work together with Julie. And Christian ministry has provided some of the greatest joys and undoubtedly many of the greatest pains that we've experienced as people. I think life's like that. It's sort of like a railway track. It's not it's not just all sweetness and light all the time. It's a two-sided thing, and much like Jesus' life, much like Paul's life, much like John's, but I started having some real questions about 6 or 7 years ago. I've been in Christian ministry a long time, and I got a lot of things right and I got a lot of things wrong. But I came to a point one day about 6 or 7 years ago where the appointment I was in, I wasn't pastoring at the time. I was assisting with youth work across 23 Salvation Army churches, along with Julie. And I was doing a lot of driving, a lot of it on my own. I'd spend sometimes up to 15, 20 hours a week in a car. And it was a lot of, I suddenly come to the conclusion one day it was a lot of wasted time. I'm not a very good reader. But I was getting to the point in my own walk with Jesus. I had a conversation with God one day. I said, God, I don't like your book. I think I'm finding a lot of it boring. It's hard to understand. There's some contradictions in there I don't understand. And I'm just fine. I got to the point after 23, 24 years of Christian ministry that I didn't read the Bible, and I thought that's got to change, or I've got to find something else to do for a living. And
that wasn't from any point of any doubt of who God is and what he is.
Absolutely not.
It was from more of a want and a pull towards His scriptures. Is that right?
Yeah, it was. I never doubted the existence of God again, and there's nothing wrong with doubt. Please hear me on that. Anybody who's doubting, God hasn't walked away from you, and doubt isn't sin. Somebody once said that doubt and faith are beautiful dance partners.
I like that.
The opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith, I believe, is control, where we have to control everything in our lives to the nth degree and not leave room for faith. I think, that's the opposite there. But I got to this point where I just wasn't reading the Bible, but I knew I should be. And I knew there was a way, there had to be a way of reading it meaningfully. And so long story short, I ended up praying a prayer that went something to the effect, God, I don't want to read the Bible. It's boring, it's contradictory, it's hard to understand. I'm obviously missing something. I don't want to read it anymore, but I want to. And that was a pivotal moment for me. There was no flashing lights, there was no booming voice from heaven. And I was talking to someone sharing this part of my story, and they said, Rob, you spend an awful lot of time driving and you want to read, but you can't so much. Why don't you get an Audible subscription and listen to audiobooks as you drive? And so I did that, and transformational for me. I read, I think the very first book I read was listened to was a book called What is the Bible by Rob Bell. Fantastic book, written by a guy who gets a lot of bad press, but a passionate follower of Jesus and lover of people. But I've read and listened to books right across the spectrum. I think that's one of the things we need to do as Christians, is read not only wisely, but read wisely. And just listening to book after book, I think I'm on book about 60 now. And I started concentrating on books that help me understand the Bible in context. So, one author once said, the Bible wasn't written to us, it was written for us. And one of the most important things we can do in regards to the scriptures is ask ourselves the question, who was this written to? What was the situation at the time? What was the context? Why was it written? And just going through this journey of biblical context has just transformed my love of Scripture, and has been so much more helpful to me in my walk with God. So,
I love what you said there about essentially nothing's wrong with having doubt.
No.
And something that our pastor here in Queenstown has said a couple of times that I've taken note of is, we live today, and this is the only time in our lives out of eternity where we get to worship in struggle, pain, strife, doubt, and things like that. So that would be the most authentic form of worship as well, because when we get to heaven, there's not much of a turning point from there. It's just all in, and there's going to be no pain. There's going to be no reason to not worship. So right now, we have a choice and the ability to sweat our way to show worship to Christ, where as soon as we die and go to heaven, which is going to be amazing and marvelous, we don't have the ability to actually suffer for the gospel. That's a one-time thing. We get to, and it's a glorious thing, really, that we get to have struggles now and then use those struggles to get closer to God. Where when we die and go to the next place, we're not using our struggles to get closer to God. We're going to be right there with Him always. And it's not that we're getting closer to God. I mean, like God's closer to our skin than our bones.
It's. I think God's a realist, and one of the realities of our broken world at the moment is that it is broken, and Christians are very good at putting posters on their walls about with the promises of God, and plaques on our walls and stickers on our fridge and sometimes our car, all of that sort of thing about declaring these wonderful promises of God. But there's a promise that Jesus made to His followers that I've never seen as a plaque on the wall.
You'll be hated because of me.
Yeah, well, that one too. There's another one, but He said, "In this world you will know hardship." It was a promise. He said, "You will."
Yeah.
And we do live in a broken world, and God's still got this.
Yeah.
God's still got this.
Here's an interesting thought that we had the other day. It was actually just yesterday. I heard somebody say, God came for life and life abundantly. Like Jesus came to give us life and life abundantly.
Yeah.
And many Western pastors, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, but they teach this and say you're going to have life and then you're going to have abundant life, as in lots of stuff, abundant in finances, abundant in family, abundance in this and that. However, what's your thoughts on when Jesus is saying you're going to have life and life abundantly? The word life actually just means life. It doesn't mean stuff life brings, it means life. So life and life everlasting would be a better translation.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think, like I said before, that life as we know it at the moment, we live in a broken world, and it will involve suffering, and it will involve hardship, and it will involve pain.
Yeah.
Many of the stories I've listened to through your podcast and in books, and some of the greatest saints on this planet have gone through incredible times of pain and suffering. Times that sometimes when the pain and the suffering has been the only abundant thing in their lives. And yet they've held on to that belief that actually God's got this. God is not surprised. That was an amazing revelation for me one day, that God is incapable of being surprised. There's nothing that can happen to us in life, and God's all of a sudden sitting up there in heaven, which is a bad thing to say because it's bad theology up there in heaven. But God is never surprised. He's never thinking, "Oh, didn't expect that to happen. What am I going to do now? I don't know." It's never like that. God knows the end from the beginning. He's got it. He doesn't have any plan Bs. God's always just plan A.
It's not that He had the Garden of Eden, which was plan A, and then we fell, so God's got to fix it now.
God's got to think of something else now. No. And it's not like that with our suffering. I mean, He's got it. And
also the suffering of Christ means that God is relatable to us in our sufferings as well. It's not that
the whole points of His coming, isn't it?
Yeah, we don't worship a God that is incapable of understanding our pain.
No.
Where He walked through the same thing in every temptation.
Every temptation.
Yeah.
Every hardship. Every betrayal. We can't say to God, you don't know how I feel, because He knows exactly how we feel. He knows exactly how we feel. And
which is actually an incredible thing, because being a perfect being, He shouldn't have any flaws. And not that that's a flaw, but it could be mistaken as one. But the only reason he kind of got around that was by living as mankind.
That's right.
In Jesus.
He came to identify with us, and the only way you can really identify with someone is
to
walk in their shoes.
To walk in their shoes. Yeah.
And we as Christians, as followers of Jesus, we're called to identify with people. We don't see someone who's sinning and go out and do the same sin so we can identify. That's not what it's about. It's about that I recognise your brokenness and I see the pain it's causing you, and I feel that because I've got my own bits of brokenness.
Yeah.
And God's got.
And you don't need to be broken to understand what brokenness is.
No, you don't.
Because Jesus was never broken. He was always perfect, but he still came to the same crossroads we come to.
Yeah.
You know, all right, do I do this or do this? Do I essentially pursue righteousness, or do I give into my sinful nature? And he still entered that crossroads from time to time. He didn't have a sinful nature, but he still experienced what sin does to humans.
Yeah,
just living in the environment of sin.
Yeah, and I think when Jesus was hanging on the cross, I can't help but wonder if he felt the brokenness of humanity. But when he cried out to his Father, he said, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah.
God hadn't forsaken him. There was no separation in the Trinity.
Yeah.
There was none of that.
He's actually quoting a psalm.
Yeah.
In that he's shouting out a psalm in quotations pretty much to affirm this has been written. The reason I'm hanging on this cross is because it has been forewritten as the Messiah would.
Yep.
And interesting enough, before that point had happened, most of the psalmists and the ones that the Pharisees that were experts in the text, they read that as an enemy of God would hang on a tree like this.
Yeah.
Yet, and that in a sense that's true, because Jesus became sin, the enemy of God, and hung on a tree. But they didn't put two and two together that it would be God hanging on the tree with sin, becoming the enemy of himself, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, God didn't kill Jesus. Humanity killed Jesus.
Yeah.
Or thought they had. The devil thought he'd won a great victory. He was just playing into God's hands.
Yeah.
But it was God didn't kill Jesus to satisfy some distorted sense of justice. Humanity killed Jesus. It was a sin that put him there.
Well, actually, I wouldn't say Jesus was killed. I would say, he laid his life down.
Oh, he did.
Because there was a lot that happened to him, and he should have died a long time before he did. Like, he was whipped and beaten and then dragged that cross, and that whipping alone normally kills people. And then the slog of bringing the cross up the hill would kill you after that. And sure enough,
if you're lucky enough to make it to the top of the hill, then or unlucky enough.
And then he's hanging on the cross, and they're like, man, this guy just doesn't die. And that's actually because he's walking at a point which is beyond death. It's beyond any man could endure. And the only reason he could do that is because he had no sin. We would give out because sin would crush us. But from his point of view, he had no sin. Therefore, nothing could crush him, and he would just indefinitely live, no matter how many blows he had, no matter how many whips or beatings or anything. And at that point when he's hanging on the cross, he is suffering beyond any of us would even be possible.
Yeah, I can't imagine the pain and the suffering, the physical and emotional pain of that alone.
Totally immortal, incapable of dying, and getting tortured. That's what's happening.
And yet he subjected himself to it willingly. So that we don't have to.
Yeah.
And, when Jesus promised that we would, in this world, know hardship and pain, he was identifying fully with us by his experience on the cross. And what I was saying before about the scriptures, we're so good at asking why. And I think we can't be afraid of asking why. Sometimes, unfortunately, in church, sometimes if you're a long-term Christian, it's you almost get the impression it's a bad thing to ask questions, even about some of the very basics of our faith.
Yep.
But if the question's there's obviously a little bit of doubt or something there that needs to be resolved, and God absolutely delights in walking that journey with us. It's an old rabbinic teaching that discussions about the things of God, about Scripture, are one of the highest forms of worship that we can partake in.
Absolutely.
Our form of worship, particularly in the West, I think, has become very, very narrow and limited in some places. Worship is what we do when we're singing in church on a Sunday, whereas Jesus' whole life was worship. And I drove through Mossburn the other day, and I pulled up outside my old primary school.
Oh, wow. And memory lane.
I know, it was a bit of that. The town seems so much smaller than it used to be, and I used to complain about how far I had to walk to school, and when it was raining, turns out it was less than 100 metres. I was a wimp.
You got tiny little legs back then.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
100 metres is like at least 300 for us now.
Exactly. But the motto of the school, I'd completely forgotten it. It's got Mossburn School, and then it's got a carved wooden sign underneath it saying "Attitude is everything."
Wow!
And it's not in the Bible, not in those words, but I think there's a very deep truth in that.
Yep.
So what's my attitude to my doubts? What's my attitude to questions? What's my attitude to worship?
Yep.
Everything I do.
Oh, for sure.
Worship.
In a different form on Scripture, to reference that would be, count it all joy.
Yeah.
The Bible says, sort of attitude you keep in check.
Yeah.
Take every thought captive.
Yep.
And press through with an incredible attitude. You and I spoke earlier about when you're vacuuming. To vacuum, what's the Bible verse where it says on everything you do
it as unto Christ.
As if unto Christ.
Yeah.
So when you're vacuuming, man, you're doing the best vacuuming you've ever done.
Yeah.
Because, you're doing it to represent Christ. And not that the Christian walk is totally works-based.
No, it's not.
But it's the reason, the heart behind doing that is to honour Christ. If you're doing that just to look good, then you probably got the wrong attitude, but it's to honour Christ.
It's to honour Christ. It's to honour the people.
Make the best coffee if you're a barista.
That's right.
Honour Christ, be the best you can be, and then people are going to be, man, what's with you? You
it's
always
not about
put
perfection. It's just what's the best I can do for. If I was doing this for Jesus, which we are, what's my attitude? How's that going to change my view of what I'm doing?
And that actually represents the servant-heartedness that God calls us to have. To value others more than ourselves.
Yeah.
What was the 2 commandments? Love the Lord God with all your heart, mind, and strength, and then love others as you love yourself.
Yeah.
So, if you love others as you have as yourself, man, if you wanted the best coffee ever, you're going to give the best coffee ever.
Yeah.
Like, it's that simple. If you want to walk into an extremely clean house, man, you're going to make sure that house is nice and clean. You're going to vacuum that house so good.
And it's interesting that scripture that you just quoted. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, body, and soul, and love your neighbour as yourself. God's only given us one way of loving Him, and that's loving people.
Yeah, I love that.
There is only one way.
Yeah,
was it the letter of John, 1 John, I think, says he says that he loves God but hates his brother. That man's a liar.
Yep.
You can't do it. You can't say you love God.
It's so true.
And not love people.
One of the greatest things I love about that, and really focusing on loving people, is to love someone. You don't look at the speck in someone's eye, the little part of them that annoys you.
Yeah.
You actually look. It doesn't matter how annoying this person is. You're going to look at the 1 or 2 let's say it's the most annoying person in the world.
Yeah.
You're going to look at the one or two things in them that make them amazing, and that's what you're going to magnify.
Yeah.
And you look past all the nitty-gritty, and the cool thing about that is that it's a representation of how God views us.
That's right.
There is a lot of, I mean, in my life, I'll put my hand up to say there's a lot more wrong with me that I could fix than things right with me.
Yep.
If I were to put all of my wrong things in a pile,
yeah,
and my right things in a pile, I think my wrong things would.
You think that pile would be bigger?
That would be a lot bigger. There's a lot I fall short on, whether it's just being a perfect husband all the time, or just vacuuming. And then Christ, when he does that, he's not looking at the big pile of stuff. He's looking at the little pile of stuff and going, that's what I'm working for. I'm
counting. Everything else is under the blood.
Absolutely.
Everything else is under the blood.
Yeah, and he picks up that big stuff, the big bad stuff in our lives, and he carries that, and he says, this is why your burden's light, because I'm going to carry it. And he did. He carried it to the cross. And it crushed him.
Yeah.
And he did it for us. He was the only one capable to be able to do that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because of his sinless life. And oh my goodness, it's just really exciting. It becomes a little bit overwhelming. I'm not that emotional guy when it comes to my spiritual walk, but just sometimes there are moments where, it's just you get overwhelmed, and that's. When he looks at us, he doesn't see us sin and failure. He sees the snowy white righteousness of Christ. Yeah. And I think we've got there's a beautiful song by Andrew Peterson that contains the line, he's singing about how important it is to love our enemies. And I don't think many Christians, would argue that, that's a call of Christ on us to love our enemies.
Yeah.
Sometimes our greatest enemy is ourselves. Sometimes my greatest enemy is me.
Yeah.
And still God calls me to love myself as he would love me. And that was one of those overwhelming moments for me a few months ago when I was looking for a track to play during a service we were running, and I tripped over this song, like I said, by Andrew Peterson, and this line that says, he calls us to, I can't remember the exact words, but he calls us to love our enemies, and sometimes my greatest enemy is me.
Yeah, and that's so true.
It's
again, it's a representation on Christ as well.
Absolutely.
Because Christ loved his enemies, which at the time was us.
Yeah.
Because he's a perfect judge, and he had to punish mankind. And at the moment we were in that boat, and that wouldn't be, So, but it's just incredible that Christ loved us within all the rubbish that we had done, and the consequences of what we had done. Christ had to endure those consequences, and he still loves us.
Yeah,
man, I just dwell on that sometimes.
Well, it's so important that we understand that God is a father. One of the profoundest experiences in life for me has been becoming a father. I've got 4 incredible children, all grown adults now, but it doesn't matter what any of those kids of mine do. My heart towards them is always one of love. I say that not to lay out a challenge for them, if they ever listen to this. I've failed in so many respects as a father, and my door will always be open to my kids, including the fridge door. I would like to think they could come to me with anything at any time.
No matter how bad it got.
And just be authentic. And, Jesus said, even though you are evil, you fathers, you know how to give good gifts to your kids. Now that's a comparison thing. I don't think I'm an evil person. I know I'm a failure sometimes, and I know I miss the mark often. But God's heart towards me is always just like my heart towards my kids.
Yeah.
And then you have grandkids on top of that, and oh my goodness, it just takes that thing to a whole new level.
Yeah. The thought from your kids to you as well, no matter how bad they become or have things, they might drop the ball and be like, oh, I've really, really screwed up this time. The Christian faith, is not to run from your father because, I'm going to get in so much trouble, but I'm in so much trouble, I'm going to run to my father. I need my dad.
Yeah.
And that's the father heart of God. And I love how it's imprinted onto his children, onto us.
Yeah.
And so we can actually understand how he feels to us, if you feel lost, if you feel like you're unworthy or whatever, don't run from me, run to me.
Run to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even bring your doubts.
Yeah. Bring your questions.
Bring your pain. I think just that comes back to that whole thing about questions in the scriptures and about God, and God welcomes the questions. I think one of the greatest tragedies in church happens when leaders particularly won't subject themselves to being questioned, or even not only about scripture but sometimes about some of the choices we make as Christian leaders. If we get to a point where we won't allow people to ask questions, then that should be a real red flag for us, and think, actually, what's going on here? Why won't I let people ask questions? Because I sometimes used to get the thought, I don't anymore, that as a minister of the gospel, as a full-time minister in a church, that
it's your job to know.
It's my job to know.
That's a tricky weight. That's a heavy weight to carry.
It is, and you get the feeling. Well, I've got to stop saying you, because I got the feeling sometimes I had to be somewhat superhuman, and I needed to have all the answers. And one of the parts of my journey over the last few years has been rediscovering my humanity and being okay with that. I'm a minister, but we've got to realise that our ministers, our leaders, they are human. They are broken. They suffer exactly the same way. We're just fellow travellers on a road. We really are, and I cannot afford as a Christian leader to get myself and view myself as something more than that, because I'm not.
It's an attitude of grace right there. It's understanding, all right, I'm not perfect. I might know someone who's perfect, which is the person I follow, Jesus Christ. But he's the person, if there are perfect things that come out of my life, it's because of him. Exactly. And when there's shortcomings,
he's the one to go to.
But they're also because of me, not because of Christ.
That's right. The biggest thing that helped me, there was a moment in I just seem to have these moments throughout life. They don't come often enough, but the one thing that helped me in that realisation, I can't even remember where I heard this song for the first time. It's not a Christian song as such. It's by a group or an individual called Five for Fighting, and it's the Superman song.
Man of Steel?
Man of Steel. He writes this song called the Superman song, and it starts off with the line, I can't stand to fly, I'm not that naive. Men weren't meant to fly with clouds between their knees. And it just goes through this. It's a bit of a parable, the way I hear it, about this fictional character called Superman, and he's struggling with his superness.
Yeah.
And he just wants to be accepted as human. And the first time I heard that song, I replayed it, and it just helped me discover that it's okay as a Christian leader to be human.
Yeah.
Because...
Well, that actually builds humility.
Yeah.
You know, if you are essentially pretending to be someone who knows the answers because you're a minister, someone
my
who,
goodness.
you know, it's your job, you got to know the answers, therefore, you know, if somebody comes up to me with a question and I don't have the answer, I'll just make something up.
No.
You know, you can't have that attitude.
No.
And it's amazing that you haven't developed that, because I can imagine that happening.
It can be a temptation.
Absolutely.
It can be
and I think I've dropped the ball there. Thought when people have asked me questions and things like that, not that I'm a minister, but...
well, you are.
I minister to people,
Yeah.
absolutely, but I'm in ministry,
Yeah.
for sure. But yeah, when people come up and they ask questions, and it's a tricky couple of words sometimes to say, I don't know, let me go find out.
Yeah.
But the moment you've said that, you don't have the burden on you for giving the wrong answer.
No, and it helps you identify with the person who's asking the question.
Absolutely.
Oh, they're not perfect either.
Yeah, and I think the people can actually smell a rotten egg when there's an answer that's not quite
People's crapper
articulated.
meters have never been more finely tuned than they are now. Really.
I love that. Yeah, like if they know that you're sort of making it up, they know.
Of course they do.
It's like, well, this guy's just saying something, you know, to cover his feet. I'll be polite and I'll say, oh, wow, good job. Yeah, cool. I understand that now. But it's actually when you do give an answer after saying, when they're aware that if you don't know, you will genuinely tell them.
Yeah.
So when you do give an answer on something that you are more confident in understanding, they're more likely to take that on board as well. And it's also, you're more confident because you know you're not making it up when you do answer. You're going to tell them if you don't know the answer. So it's so important to have an attitude of humility.
Oh, it is.
Especially for pastors. And I suppose in what we're doing here on the podcast is we ask lots of questions and we do a bit of teaching on here. And teachers are held at a higher standard in the Bible.
Yeah. That's one of my least favorite scriptures. It's
extremely scary. So because you can, your words that come out of your mouth will direct people's paths.
Yeah.
So to have that in the forefront of your mind, all right, I better make sure I know this answer. And if I don't, I'm going to run to the Father. Yeah. I'm not going to run from him.
And it may
shame.
not be the complete answer either.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been a Christian now, 47 years, something like that. I've got more questions now than I've ever had in my life.
Yeah.
At the same time, God is bigger to me than he's ever been.
Yeah.
It seems some strange paradox that the more I get to know him, the more I read the scriptures, the more I observe humanity and how it works. I just have more and more questions, and yet God just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
I thought it'd be the opposite way around. I thought the more questions I've got, obviously God's going to get smaller and smaller and just more distant. But no, it's the exact opposite for me.
You find out one thing, and that reveals 20 more questions about...
Absolutely. I made some reference before to some old rabbinic teachings and one of them is that the old Jewish leaders and rabbis, that they viewed the scriptures, every scripture, as a 70-faceted diamond.
Yes.
And
awesome.
You turn the diamond and you see it in a totally different light, and it reflects something different. And we've got to start understanding that scripture's like that, and become authentic in our questioning and in our life with God and with people. And I read a book recently that I'm re-listening to at the moment, and it tells the story of Job. And actually, I think I've got a quote on my phone here. I'll just look it up because it just really spoke to me. I mean, Job's story is one of the oldest books in the Bible, Job.
Yep.
And most people listening to this will have some idea of, Job's struggles, but we're just let me find this quote here.
It's all right.
Yeah, so it's the author says, Job's words do not accurately reflect God as Job's friends do, but Job himself is in true relationship with God as the three friends are not. A relationship of heart and soul, life or death and passion. Job stays married to God and throws dishes to him. The three friends have a polite non-marriage with separate bedrooms and separate vacations. and just as I got into a bit of a hole years ago reading the scriptures, I think currently prayer is like that for me. I'm finding prayer incredibly difficult at the moment, and I'm learning and trying to discover new ways of praying, and I don't see it as a sudden failure. I see it now as God's leading me in the next step in my journey.
Yep.
And my communion with Him and prayer. And one of the ways that I believe that has to happen is I have to be completely transparent with God. Sometimes I may have to throw dishes with Him. I may have to get angry with Him. I may have to tell Him how disappointed I am with Him. And then when I started going down that road, I see, isn't that what a big portion of the Bible is about? The whole book of Lamentations is that idea of lament. Many of the Psalms are just complaints to God. God, you said this, but look at why do the evil prosper and the righteous suffer?
Yeah.
I
mean, even just in my marriage, Laura and we sometimes have fights. Not that we're throwing dishes at each other, but we do have fights, and to be honest, a lot of the time are theological debates almost. But I mean, just the other day we were having a bit of a discussion, is what I would call it. But Laura thinks I'm fighting with her with the Calvinism mindset of predestination, and then the Arminianism mindset of free will. And I got kind of heated, I suppose, and but then afterwards, we're sitting down, we're both sitting down, we're both going, we're reviewing how much this actually matters. And we're like, I'm glad I got it out there, but now it's put into perspective on what a waste of time that fight was, and it doesn't change much, and I still love my wife. Yeah. And she's still good, and she's still amazing.
She's incredible.
And I hope she thinks the same way to me.
I think you'd know by now she did.
Yeah, well, no dishes were thrown. So. But, because of that fight, created that space to be able to think and process what we had just discussed. If you bottle everything in with God and you never unleash those thoughts, you're never going to get to the point where you can actually meditate on those tough questions, and that actually is what brings you closer to Him. Where everybody thinks, if I ask these questions, if I get in these fights with my wife or with God or whatever it is, then that's going to pull me apart. But obviously, if it's done in love and in a respectful way, not to divide, but to expand your knowledge, your wisdom, your heart towards what you're trying to learn, and
none of those things are worth breaking relationship over. None of them.
No,
we have got to get over as Christians our addiction to being right.
Yeah. And Laura and I now take the stance. We might have two totally different views on something, and we're still married. And what it does is it edifies each other. I might be a little bit off on these few things, and then Laura might be a little bit off on these few things. And a lot of the time, God gives you 50%, maybe not 50%, probably 90% of everything correct to Laura, and I might get 10%. But together, we're 100%, and we understand the full picture.
Yeah. In relation to that issue, I had somebody debating that one day, and then a third party stepped and said, well, actually, what if they're both right?
Yeah. I've heard that a lot with the free will predestination one. Yeah.
We just got to get over the need to be right.
Yeah. I've got a really weird thought on the predestination one at the moment, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. But from God's perspective, since he knows all and is above all and has control over all, being his makeup of his being, of an infinite creature, from his perspective, it's all written out. Because he knows everything, he knows the outcome, he knows everything. From our perspective of not understanding those things in our thoughts, that brings free will to us.
Yeah.
But that's only from our perspective. From God's perspective, he knows if we're going to choose the Big Mac or the cheeseburger.
Yeah.
It's not actually a free choice from his perspective, because he 100% knows which way we're going to go. So I think it's a bit of both in that sense. From us, it feels like free will. From God, he's like, I already know what's going to happen. I'm the one that designed everything. I let the oceans measure right to this border here because I designed it that way. I put you in 2021, the year 2021, for this moment. That was God's choice, not my choice. He put us here. But we live out our lives with a free will mindset, yet it's sort of predestined from God's mindset. And it's a very messy...
Yeah, I mean, I tend to come from a more Arminian mindset on that question. And I paused there before the end because I'm trying to eliminate the word "but" from my conversations, because "but" often means just kindly disregard everything I just said.
For anyone listening, I am still searching this. Yeah. I'm not set in stone with
good on you.
Anything that's Arminianism or Calvinism. I have my hands open, my mind open, and I'm just here to learn. And it's not a primary focus on Christianity. It's it's not even a secondary. It's like way down the line on what's important.
Yeah,
it's just understanding Christ, and Christ alone is the most important.
Yeah, because the thing I was going to say there is that the moment we get dogmatic about any of that stuff, it hinders having deep, meaningful, authentic relationships with people. And no theological point is worth that. Yeah.
I know you and I have talked even since you've been here, just hanging out. And we've had a couple of differences on a few things. They're very minor, though, and they don't matter. And all I get is I sit back the next day and I'm like thinking about it, and it's edifying my spirit, and that's a form of worship, like we said earlier.
Feel the same way.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's so good.
As iron sharpens iron.
Nothing is worth breaking relationship over.
Yeah.
Jesus never broke relationship with anybody. The closest he came was with the Pharisees, who were so dogmatic about their own views on things. And yet, at the end of the day, many of the Pharisees and Sadducees came to be followers of Christ.
Yeah,
he never closed the door totally on anybody. Some people chose to walk away.
Yep.
But that inclusiveness of Jesus, it was just anybody can come at any time, irrespective of your failures, of your hurts, of your pain, your sin, just that all-encompassing, unconditional love of God.
Yeah.
And talking about it like this, you and I have had a couple of discussions, like you say, in the time I've been here. It's a form of worship.
How important is it for people in ministry, pastoral positions, and particularly since you sit in that seat? How important is it to have an attitude like this to your congregation, to people that attend your church?
It's
have a door open.
It's absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. Because, like I say, I'm human. I in our current appointment, which we're just in the process of finishing up, because we've just received a transfer to Auckland. So we're just finishing up in our current appointment at Upper Hutt. But I'll never forget the very first Sunday that we were there. I stood up for the first time in front of that congregation, and I looked around the room, and I thought, this is one of the most diverse congregations I have ever seen. There were people there who had so many challenges, both intellectually, physically, and mentally in their lives. There was a portion of those people there, and you had everything between that, and then I looked in around the room, and because the Upper Hutt Salvation Army Church is so close to our mission training school, we have a lot of the staff there attend our church, and so I'm seeing these very, very challenged people with so many challenges in their life. It's almost mind-boggling. And I look around the room, and then there's people with master's degrees in theology and and degrees in adult education, and so you're just right around this whole spectrum. And I thought, God, that was a little bit intimidating to start with. When you got tutors at a theological mission training school sitting there, and you're preaching to them. And I want to go back to that in a minute as well. But it was challenging. I thought, God loves every one of these people just the same.
Yeah.
And I don't need to feel intimidated.
No.
And one of the beauties I've discovered is that some of the staff at the college, on a number of times now, after a message I may have delivered on a Sunday, have come up and they've raised a point with me, not with a view to them being right and me being wrong, but I gave them permission to speak into my life. If I'm crossing a boundary here, if I'm going too far somewhere, please come and tell me. And some of them came and said some stuff even before my attitude is, I need to welcome that stuff.
Yeah.
I need, not because they've been to university for 6 years to get to where they are, but because they care enough to...
It's not a you're right, I'm wrong.
No, they're doing it for the good of the body of Christ.
Yep.
Like you said before, iron sharpens iron. And it's a real joy. Julie and I are currently on 8 weeks of a 12-week sabbatical, which we're enormously grateful for. And we came away having had no trouble at all arranging people to preach and lead services while we're away, because people in our congregation just... You asked them to put, I'll take care of 1 or 2 of those Sundays for you.
Awesome.
And as a pastor, I don't have to preach every Sunday. I've got a responsibility to enable ministry.
Yep.
I don't. If I'm having to do all the preaching, if I'm having to do all the leading, that can very quickly lead to my ego blowing out.
Yeah. Or like you and I have talked earlier about it going from calling to job, or calling to career.
Oh my goodness!
And you don't want a career as a pastor; you want a calling as a pastor.
Yeah.
So important.
Yeah. So it's my job to make way for other people. And this year I'd be lucky to preach 50% of the time.
Really?
Yeah, because I just want to. I got so many good communicators in my church that I think most churches do, that are often overlooked.
Yeah.
And it's my responsibility to make way for that.
Absolutely. I have noticed in some of the letters of Paul, when he's talking in the Bible in the New Testament, when he's talking about, if anyone has a message to share, allow them to have the platform. And I think that does need to be encouraged in churches these days. So the fact that you said that is just absolutely awesome.
Yeah.
We got some fantastic speakers in our church, wholeheartedly. And I go to a small group on a Tuesday night. And that small group, each week there's a different person teaching just on a chapter.
Yep.
And
awesome.
It it edifies people to step up in their faith.
Yeah.
In a safe environment where they could say everything wrong, but it's in a safe environment anyway. It doesn't matter. We're going to love them, and they're. But I mean, to be fair, nobody does do that. They think that they might, but they won't.
No.
God is bigger than our fear, and public speaking actually is what's the number one fear in America. Second fear is death. It's more than people would rather die than speak in public. So you got a ballsy job.
There was a couple of things that stopped me answering the call to full-time ministry, and one of them was the fear of public speaking. That was one of my biggies. Now the problem is getting me to shut up.
It's more like the podcast, because I don't feel like I'm speaking to lots of people, but lots of people end up hearing it.
Yeah. It's a bit crazy, isn't it? That was the calling process for us was amazing. Julie was called years before she even knew me, but I think she married me to get out of it, because I wasn't called at the time. But there was a couple of things, and one of them was, and it may seem strange to a lot of people out there, but one of my things, I just couldn't imagine myself being a full-time ministry in the Salvation Army, because back in those days, some of the things you'd have to do were a little bit weird. Like you'd visit the local drinking establishments on a Friday night with the magazine, and just try and get, just do it to raise a few dollars for mission, and to build relationships with some local people, and give the gospel in a written form, and I just could not see myself doing that. I said, God, just absolutely no way. And then God, I'm not going to answer this call, because neither Julie or I have any musical ability. So, and I knew it was likely that our first appointment could be to a small church somewhere that didn't have any musical support, and the idea of leading a congregation in worship without any support like that was. So between the public speaking and those two things, I said no for a while, and I finally said yes. And then when we received our first appointment, it was to not one but two small Salvation Army churches, about 27 kilometres apart, up in the Waikato, Te Awamutu and Cambridge. So we had 3 services to lead every Sunday.
Wow.
There wasn't a musician in either place. Both places were financially...
You have to learn the guitar or something?
No, mate. No, I didn't. I did buy a guitar, kidding myself that I was going to learn, never have. Still. No,
you still got it?
No, I gave it to our youngest son, Andrew, and he ended up teaching himself guitar, and he's a brilliant musician now. But, so, now I had 2 or 3 sermons to preach every Sunday, and Julie would do some, although we had a young family at the time, so I carried most of that one. And because both churches were sailing close to the wind financially, I had to visit 11 hotels on a Friday night.
Oh my gosh.
And people were very warm and very generous, and it was wonderful. But I had to do that 11 times every Friday night, and I had to drive 110 kilometres to do it. And no musicians, and 3 services on Sunday.
What do you use, tracks or something?
We used some cassette tapes for backing tracks. Sometimes we would ask a friend to come in from Hamilton when they were available to help us out. But it was sometimes we'd just sing a cappella.
Yeah.
But I had all of these things that I said no because this and this. And in our first appointment, all 3 of them are just there in abundance.
Yeah.
And some people say, I heard the audible voice of God. I think I've never heard the audible voice of God, but I think I did hear him laugh that night. I think he had a bit of a chuckle.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so no.
It's interesting. You say like you didn't feel called and things like that. There's a saying that we've said a couple of times on the podcast, which is God doesn't call the qualified, but He qualifies the called.
Yeah, exactly.
And
he really does.
You listed a whole bunch of things that you're like, these are the reasons why I definitely don't want to do this.
Yeah.
And then God goes, well, I'm going to train you in those areas then, and we're going to do it all at once, and we're going to expand your capacity, and you're going to build this character and this growth and this capacity to be able to withstand it.
Yeah, I was really able to identify with Moses.
Yes. Wow.
But yeah, God, I'm not a public speaker. I'm not this. I'm not that.
Yeah.
So
Did he provide you with an Aaron? Julie?
No. No, he provided me with Julie. There's no doubt about that. I am the luckiest man on the planet, I can tell you. She's just amazing.
She's awesome.
She is. And but I still ended up doing. And what I discovered was that I loved studying Scripture. I loved preaching. And there was nothing short of the presence of God that sort of built that in me. And like I say now, getting me to shut up is the problem. And
I love it, you and I, a couple of times, we pretty much need to schedule out a good 3 hours each time we hang out, because it's just...
It's so good.
And the funny thing is, it has nothing to do with what we're up to in life. We just talk about God the whole time.
It's good, isn't it?
I mean, it's. I'm glad we got Facebook, because I would still not know where you are in New Zealand.
Yeah. It's. I was going to say something else, and it's completely slipped my mind.
Oh,
and it's
sorry.
probably God saying,
You said you love studying Scripture.
Yeah, and I mean. And I got so much stuff wrong. I mean, we were in that first appointment for 3 years. I goodness knows how many sermons I preached in that 3 years. But it was in the early days of computers, and we had a very early model of a PC, and I typed out all my sermons. And I got to my second appointment, and I opened this file with all my sermons, and I started reading through this stuff. And my initial thought was, man, those people put up with some rubbish. That's terrible. Did I really say that? And yet, most of those people are still following Christ. And, I didn't poison them, and I didn't ruin their faith. And they were very gracious. And
sometimes it's what they need to hear at the time as well. Even if you are off. God uses all things for good. For those who love him. The Bible teaches us that. So it's an interesting one. Like, I've dropped the ball a few times. I remember evangelizing to this one person, and I'm a very factual person. I like to almost prove that God's real. Like, these are the reasons, because of the planets are this way, and the sun's this hot and it's this far away, and it all screams designer. There's intelligent design, and that is, to me, the most abundant sign out there that's God's there. It couldn't be more clear in my mind.
But that's just not going to reach some people.
Some people just don't care about that sort of stuff. And man, I was like evangelizing to this one person for a good hour, and just eyes glazing over, couldn't care less, was being respectful about it. And it shocked me, because she was a Israelite,
right?
Like from Israel, and she's like, no, I don't believe in God. I'm like, how is that possible? And then after I pretty much probably turned off Christianity as much as possible through my boredom of what I find interesting, it's not the way to reach some people. Sometimes that tactic is really good for some people, but for her, she needed love. She needed to be told there's a God out there that loves you tremendously, that literally pulls from the east to the west together to get you. And I luckily had this amazing girl, Fabiola, shout out to you, who came in and pretty much saved the day. She went in and she evangelized to her, and I was just watching from the other side of the room, and I was like, I've got to learn how to evangelize with love, not with facts and figures. It's got to be so, and that is the most effective way I find to evangelize to people. There's a hole in our lives. there's a hole that's crying out, you are loved. You know, or how do I be loved? How do I be accepted?
Yeah.
And that's what the gospel is. It's you're so loved.
That's it.
That somebody's gone from the ends of the earth to get you.
Yeah, like if you can talk someone into believing in God, someone else can talk them out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when it's matched with a demonstration of the love and the power of God, through love, then people can't. Yeah, people find it very difficult to resist.
Yeah, and I think the intellectual thing on facts and figures, there's a place for it for probably more believers than unbelievers. Convincing a scientist that, I mean, it has happened, let's be honest. I'm reading the Screwtape Letters.
Right.
And there's one point, so for those listening, the Screwtape Letters is a book from C.S. Lewis, an incredible Christian
author.
And he wrote this book that is from the demon's perspective on how they twist things to get us further and further from Christ.
Yeah.
And one of the things is, don't let, he calls them patients, don't let your patient, which is a Christian or somebody, maybe a new believer or somebody coming close to Christ, he said, don't let your patient, this is the demon talking, don't let your patient dive into science, and not the true science. I'm talking about, not fake science as in people pulling into different ideas that are unprovable, but not logical, proven ways to prove that God's real. And C.S. Lewis puts another quote, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not because I see the sun, but by the sun I see everything else.
That's right.
And that's pretty much what he's talking about with science. You know, it's by science that you actually understand the magnificence of creation.
Oh, there's no contradiction between science and faith.
Absolutely none. But there's a lot of mistruths that are unprovable, pretty much. And they let's take evolution for example. Even if evolution's proven, it doesn't disprove God.
No, it doesn't.
But a lot of people just decide that, okay, evolution's been proved, not that it has, but they think that it has because it's taught in schools these days, therefore God can't be real. And they make this weird correlation between the two, and you're like, they actually have there's no correlation to those two things at all. There's actually a theory called theistic evolution.
Yeah, there is.
Which is evolution, still the chances of it happening are so remote that it had to have intelligent designer guiding it from
once again, what if it's both? What if the elements of evolution and God's creation?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
but it's not a primary issue.
No, it's not.
It's not something that matters. But I love those questions, you know, and they shouldn't pull you away from God. If anything, man, they pull me closer.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I've got more questions now than I've ever had in my life, but God's bigger than he's ever been as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes he's more distant, which is, the journey with prayer that I'm really struggling with at the moment, but I know he's there. I know he's there, and he's leading me through this time of pain and searching to grow me.
Yeah.
And like a loving father, God doesn't know how to be absent from us. Some people say God can do anything. Well, no, he can't. He can't be absent from us because he can't violate his own word.
Well, he's eternal, and you can't lessen something that's eternal.
Yeah.
You can't make it shrink. You can't add to it. You can't take away from it. If it's eternal, it's eternal. So, he can't distance himself because he has to be in, through, and with all things all the time. Yeah,
there's an important teaching, I think, in Jesus when he's teaching his disciples to pray. I mean, they saw how he prayed and they wanted to pray the same way. And one of the first things Jesus said, when you pray, say, Our Father who art in heaven. And Western thinking, we think heaven's that distant place where God lives far, far away. But apparently the original meaning of the word, the people who originally heard those words, what they understood was, they understood three things. The heavens are, yes, that distant place that where God may live and we may go someday. But they also heard, so they understood it's the cosmos It's also the atmosphere surrounding the earth.
Yep.
But the same word is also used for the air we breathe. So Jesus was saying, our Father who fills the cosmos, who fills the atmosphere of the earth and is as close as the air we breathe.
Wow. That's powerful. That changes
everything, doesn't it?
Yeah, when you view it in that light.
Pray the prayer like that. I think, wow, God, it was as close as the air I breathe.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
So true. Oh, that's awesome. I love that. It's so cool. Did you want to share anything else?
Oh, yeah, like I say, there's many. I don't know. I'd have to think about that more, but I did make some notes.
It's interesting. Before you came on, we were having a talk about it, and I just explained this to the listeners, and Rob's like, how does it work? How do we talk? And we're like, well, we're just going to talk pretty much how you and I normally talk, and it's probably going to go for like 3 or 4 hours. But we probably can't.
No, we can't.
Can't go that long.
I think the main other revelation that God's taken me through recently is a discovery of a new word, and it's the word liminal.
Okay. And
I promised myself a few years ago that actually I'm not going to read any more books on Christian leadership, because I'd read and listened to so many books on Christian leadership, and I haven't got the gift of leadership. I'm not a natural leader in that respect, and I felt these books calling me to be something I wasn't, and so I vowed I would never read another Christian book on leadership until I got a recommendation about this book called How to Lead When You've Got No Idea Where You're Going, and I thought, yep, that sounds a bit of me. Just where I was at the time. But the author, Susan Beaumont, incredible author, she goes into some depth about this word limen. Now, limen it's the entrance from one place into another. So there's when you step outside a door over the step into the house, that space is called a liminal space. You're moving from one place into another, and we have liminal times in our lives, and we have personal liminal experiences. We may get married, we may change jobs, something like that. There are liminal experiences that happen in our communities. In our nation, we're going through a liminal experience with COVID at the moment. Just such a big liminal space. We're moving from something we knew and that was familiar into a space where none of us know what this is going to look like. And so there are personal, community, national, and sometimes international liminal things like COVID that happen, and we can either get bogged down and discouraged and overwhelmed in liminal times, or we can get creative and we can explore and we can take our time. And she talks about the concept of liminal overload, where you've got personal, community, national or international. We get into a whole lot of liminal spaces at once, and it just causes liminal overload. And I think that's where many people are at in the world now. Not least of all the church. I think if anybody tells you they know what the church is going to look like in terms of the future, I really don't think anybody can say that. We just don't know. I heard a Christian leader say very, very recently, it's going to be good when this COVID thing's all over and we're back to normal. I'm not sure that normal was serving us very well. I think maybe God through this, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying God caused COVID to punish the wicked in the world. No, he didn't. We don't do that to our kids.
We're doing that all on our own. We don't need God's help to do that.
But God is inspiring new creativity in His people and all over the world. I think there's new ways of doing things, and I think we just need to stay in this liminal space as long as possible and just get creative and stay loving and united and just see what God does, because I think the church is ahead for exciting days, but it's just not going to look like it looked like before.
No, everyone thinks that we're going to go back to the old normal.
Oh,
but no, it's a new normal. It's going to be a lot different. Yep. I mean, I think the start of this podcast was inspired. God uses everything, like
he does.
COVID happened, so everybody's locked down and they can't do anything. So how many more people started listening to podcasts? And then the Lord, and then the Lord said to myself and all the other hosts, get testimonies heard, get them out there. Yeah. And we're like, all right, that sounds like a podcast. Let's do it. And I had never ever had any inspiration to do a podcast. No. And God said, we're going to use this. We're going to use this pandemic to get my word out there.
Yep.
And there could be people that would have never gone to church, but they now decide to listen to podcasts, and they come across something like this one or another podcast, and then boom, Christ comes into their life like they've never seen before, and that would have never happened. Well, it would have never happened without a pandemic.
No.
Like God uses all things for good. It's incredible.
Yeah, that's why I think Satan must be the most frustrated personality in the universe, because anything he can do, the very worst that humanity can do, God can look at it and says, I can make something out of that.
I can work with that.
I can do that. I got this.
Yeah. It's. I mean, the thing is being. It says that he destroys things. He's come to steal, kill, and destroy.
Yeah.
And God is known as the creator.
That's right. Man, you might have life.
Man, you can destroy as much as you want, but God can always out-create you. Like He will just continue creating.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just a continual journey of discovery.
Yeah.
And sometimes that takes some pain and some anguish to work its way through, and that's okay.
And to have this moment in time where you can actually have a bit of pain, and because it's not going to last that long. Like we live in the tiniest season. They call our life as a vapor of smoke.
Yep.
And then it's there, and then it disappears. And that's how short our life is in the span of eternity. Yeah. So we've got this really small moment to worship God with a broken heart.
Yeah.
And that's really unique. That's something that causes real willpower.
Yeah.
And I love that. Anybody that's struggling to worship Christ now or to press into God, press in now while you can, because soon you're not going to be able to show God how far you're prepared to go, because when you go to heaven, that's we've made it. There's no more pain, there's no more anguish, but to worship in pain and in anguish is just an incredible thing. And it sounds weird to say, but
it's pain in some sense is our friend, because it drives us to a better way. And yes, we need to press into God, and part of pressing into God, I've discovered for me, is actually part of the pressing in is actually relaxing.
Well, you've been working in ministry full time. You probably don't know how to relax. People constantly contacting you,
I mean, we're 7 weeks into the 8-week part of our sabbatical, and another 4 weeks next year. Honestly, it took me weeks to actually get to a point of actually being relaxed. And relaxing, and when I say relax, it's not only just relax physically and emotionally, but just relax in the presence of God, because He unconditionally loves me.
It's true.
And He enjoys spending time with me.
Yep.
I mean, Mother Teresa once said, she would spend hours with God, alone with God. And somebody asked her, what did you say? She says, I said nothing. And they said, well, what did God say? He said nothing. She just was okay just being
in the presence
of God.
Wow.
And then out of that, God changes you on the inside. And that's something I'm really struggling with, is just being. And it's okay. I don't have to strive and struggle. And
in the Screw Tape Letters, it talks about how he calls the enemy. So the demons calling God the enemy. And he says the enemy will use will work from the inside out, and he will change them layer by layer, that sense. So from our perspective, we need to affect from the outside in.
Yeah.
We still have a bit of hold from the outside, but not from the inside. So we have to dig our way back to the heart of the Christian and turn him from there. And the Christian his heart is changing, his actions and things like that. So he's really talking about the flesh. So as a new Christian, or you might be an older Christian struggling with certain things, that your flesh is something that the enemy still has a little bit of control of temptation over, but your heart it works on its way inside to outside. And I just thought that was really interesting, because there's absolutely no way that I would ever change my heart towards the way that I feel with God. But yes, I've got these struggles, I've got these things that I have to walk through. And you were just saying, you've got a handful of these struggles and that you're still working your way towards it. It's a process. God says, be transformed by the renewal of your mind.
That's right.
That's an inside thing working its way out, not be totally perfect on all your actions and then your mind will catch up.
I'm just finding God take me through these liminal experiences, moving into new spaces, and that can sometimes be really, really frightening. But a year and a half ago, our eldest granddaughter, I was chatting with her one day, and she said, "Granddad, how old are you?" And I said, "Gabriella, I'm 60. She says, "Oh, you're going to be dead soon." and
oh my God!
I know, she's great. She's fantastic. Gotta love grandies. But it did get me thinking, and often, there are times I'm a possibility thinker, and I think, I see somebody doing something, I'd like to have a go at that, or I'd like to build that, or I'd like to do that, or I'd like to read that book, or whatever. And but I'm increasingly asking myself the question, is this thing worthy of my time? I'm literally going to be dead soon. I may have, none of us know how long we've got. I may have, God willing, 20, 30 years left yet.
Yeah.
But I don't know. But I'm increasingly asking myself the question at 62 years of age, is what I'm doing now actually worthy of my time? Is this going to honour, is this going to make me a better follower of Christ?
That's powerful.
It is.
Yeah. And
I was talking with my clinical supervisor one day, and she said, "Rob, I know you fairly well. I've known you for 10, 11 years now." She says, "You need to go fishing." I very much enjoy fly fishing. And I said, "Excuse me?" And I was talking about the struggle I was having in ministry and personally. And she says, "You need to go fishing." And I says, "But Farrell, I enjoy fishing, but I can't say I feel particularly close to God when I'm out there. I'm a guy, I can only concentrate on one thing at once." They say that's why men never die in their sleep, because they can't do two things at once. But she said, "What happens for you when you're out fishing?" And I thought about it, and she said, "What happens to you on the inside?" And I said, "I relax and I feel my soul going back to its right shape." And she said, "Well, what's not God about that?"
Wow.
What's not God about that?
Yeah. It's not always having to have one of those Paul moments where you get stunned and thrown off your horse and blind for 3 days to have an encounter with God. No.
God's there all the time.
Yeah.
And I've discovered he likes intimate little trout streams as much as I do.
Yeah.
And I was on a small river in northern Southland the other day, and just having the time of my life, and think, yeah, God is here. And I'm not reaching out to anybody. I'm doing something that I enjoy and brings restoration to me. I'm witnessing the manifest creation of God in a very powerful way. And I'm going to be a better person because of this. Now, I could get all selfish about that and go fishing 3 days a week every week. that'd be different kettle of fish altogether. But I need to take the burden off myself of fighting my way into the presence of God when actually He's close as the air I breathe.
Yeah, for sure. Wow.
Yeah.
So, Rob, before we finish, what would be some advice that you would like to, give out to anybody listening that might have walked through or feeling a little bit overburdened in their ministry right now?
Right. If you're going through hell in ministry, keep on going.
There's a fourth man in the fire.
There's another in the fire. Beautiful, beautiful song. That's another song that really touched me in a deep place one day. There is another in the fire. But yeah, if you're going through hell, keep going. You don't stop in hell.
Yeah. Run the good race.
Run the good race and get help. Be transparent. Find good people. They are out there. If you're in full-time ministry and you haven't got a clinical supervisor or a spiritual director, get one.
Yeah.
Find someone who can speak truth into your life. I've been with the same clinical supervisor now for 11 years. Her biggest spiritual attribute is to tell the truth. She knows me so well, she can spot a lie a mile away. And she will call me on stuff. You're not designed to do this, and find someone outside of your own circle of ministry, completely outside your own circle of ministry, who can speak truth, who will love you unconditionally. And you may have to go through 2, 3, 4 people to find someone who you can get that chemistry with. You find someone who's going to love you and speak truth into your life. And the other thing I want to say, if you're going through hell, keep on going. You will get through this. And be open to the question, is this what I want to do? Is this what God wants me to do for the rest of my life? Or is this God's way of leading me to something new? You've got to be really honest and careful about that question.
Yeah.
So, do that. And for God's sake, look after your own family. I've seen so many Christian people in Christian ministry whose marriages have ended up on the rocks, whose kids have ended up walking away from faith. Supposedly for the sake of ministry. The most important part of any Christian minister's congregation are his wife or husband and their children. The scripture very clearly points that out. Look out and know yourself. Know yourself. Know what your passions are. Know what your strengths are. Know what your weaknesses are. Know what makes you angry, and know why.
Yeah.
Know why. And there's a number of times I've had to take myself off into a good Christian counsellor, and I'm a people pleaser by nature, and I hate conflict. But I had to find out, where's that rooted, and what dysfunction is that causing in me. So, keep on going. Look after yourself. Look after your family. Treasure your family, and know yourself. Yeah, that's probably the best bit of advice I could give on the top of my head. That's
great. No, honestly, I even just listening to that can definitely apply that to many, many areas of my life, and I've definitely been edified and encouraged throughout this discussion with you, Rob. So thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure, Joel.
You're an incredible man, and want to obviously invite you to come back on at any point.
Yeah, I'd love that.
We would love to. Let's get into some of the funny theological ones.
Ooh, that'd be fun.
Yes. So we'd love that, and really, really appreciate your time, Rob. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Joel.
It's an honour to actually be worthy of your time. From what your granddaughter said, your time's valuable because you'll be dead soon.
I'll be dead soon.
Cool. All right. Well, come back on the Jesus Magnet podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.